Hi, folks. I'm just waiting. I was expecting, well, we're expecting a few more, so I'll just see if they come on. Maybe wait for one more minute.
Shruti, your voice has changed.
Oh, I've changed my hairstyle as well. Absolutely.
Yeah, well, it's been a tough summer by the looks of it.
Okay, so it doesn't seem to be anyone else turning up, so we shall get underway. Okay, so welcome, folks. Just to explain, this is a very kind of flexible format. As you'll see from the schedule, we have these webinars every 3 to 4 weeks typically. The next one few is in 3 weeks' time. I do try and remind people of this as we go along, which should be, by my reckoning, the 27th of September. Another one 2 weeks later, 3 weeks later, etc., down through the program. We've tried to schedule them using our psychic ability to not clash with things like annual holidays around end of year, other dates that we know of. So we do our best to try and coordinate that. We also try and coordinate them with other groups. There's a couple of groups ahead of you folks. And so that's why you'll notice about halfway through the time slot change. Well, no, near the end, you change over to the 7 o'clock slot. That just makes it a little bit easier for us to manage it. The format is very much me answering any questions that pop up. If I don't have questions sent in advance, or if nobody asks questions in the webinar itself, I've plenty I can talk about. Recapping, I kind of keep notes, very rough notes on what people have asked at various stages, and we've been doing this for quite a while now, so we know kind of some of the things that might be missed in the recordings. For example, one that I say at the very beginning now, because in case I forget to do it along, we're working on updating the handbook. The regulations were a little bit fluid, is a nice word to use, a little bit changeable during COVID. Every university that I know of, regulations changed, systems changed, and we're kind of settling back into a more normal, whatever normal means, set of regulations and guidelines. It didn't affect materially very much, but just processes were slightly adjusted. And we just need to reflect that. Because of that, when we started with Salford, things were very changeable. So the handbook that currently exists is an old DMI pre-Salford relationship document. The thesis itself doesn't really change, but the process of marking, supervision, things like that have changed a little bit. So I'm working on that at the moment. I just got clarification for a couple of technical things from Salford only just today. So hopefully we get that done the next couple of days for you guys. I'm more than happy to answer questions if you want to turn on a microphone or put a message in the chat. If you're familiar with Zoom, which I think we've used so many different platforms, it's hard to remember which is which, but if you click on the chat function, you can put in a question at any time. The most substantial difference between what you might see in the recordings, which again, it's kind of a difficult one. Do we need to go and re-record the whole lot, or if someone knew how to dub it over, it might blank bits out or add in bits, it might do a whole lot better than re-recording. I know I've done quite a few of the recordings, and it takes a lot of hours to get 1 hour of recording done comfortably. And I don't really want to commit my life to that sort of thing. So, but if we do, we do. The one thing that's materially different is there is no physical submission of thesis. What you submit in the end is a digital version. So that only popped up recently with a group where I hadn't made it very clear. So the structure of the program, you've got the spreadsheet thing there from Shruti would have sent it on to you a couple of days ago, I think last Thursday or Friday. Let me share a screen here with you guys in a second, and just to show you and explain what it all means. Sorry if I could find the share button. There we go. Now, for some beautifully wonderful reason, the chat. Oh no, there it is. Yeah, the chat isn't as comfortably handy when you're sharing a screen. Okay, so tonight is the Tuesdays are here. The green sessions are all on Tuesdays, and the appropriate months, so September 6th down along. You then have submissions on the right-hand column. Now, the submissions are interesting. People ask, there's lots of questions. I'll try and cover a few of the things that are generally asked. If and it pops to mind that you want to ask, please do. So firstly, the submissions, they're not obligatory, but I think they're pretty essential. Okay. What we've found over many years, and just for my own amusement, you guys are the 28th group I've worked with the DMI. So I have a fair bit of experience at this stage. And when we started the programs, long before the Salford relationship existed, it was with the Scottish Qualifications Authority validated the program at that stage. Absolutely, yeah, it says 12 months. Yeah, and it's 8-9 months. If you were doing it full time, to be 3 months. So the University of Salford runs this type of program with full-time students over a tighter period, and the thesis is a 3-month process. So yeah, it is about 9 months. The final date which you have to put into your brain is Friday the 19th of May. Yeah. So what are the deadlines about? When you're supervising students, it would be wonderfully idealistic to say you would respond to students as they come to you, and you would be totally free and easy about it. But that generally means that things end up losing structure and losing flow and losing kind of sequencing. So what we've done is we've identified touch points, call them submission points, where you will submit something to a supervisor. As a supervisor, as somebody who's managed the process for a long time, without these, people fall behind fairly quickly. I've dealt with a couple of students in other systems. I was the one who introduced this idea of submissions. Other places you don't come across it. Like I was helping my niece finish her thesis recently. Similar level to you guys, different type of program, but no deadlines. A supervisor who's hard to get in touch with at all. To the level that I think she could have made a formal complaint, but I wasn't going to wind her up too much. And just she didn't know what to do and when to do it, which meant she did nothing. And so that's one type. The other is where it's oh no, whenever you're ready, you submit stuff to me. Again, you're a student, you're sitting there thinking the lit review, gosh, it's not great. I can't really show it to anyone yet. No, I'll give them next week. And then that week turns into a crazy week at home when the kids get sick or something happens in work or, whatever. You have to visit someone somewhere, your boss says you have an important meeting on Friday. Oh, let's just focus on that. All these things happen. And all of a sudden, what in your head was a lovely structure has fallen completely apart, and you've nothing submitted, and it's months into the program. And I have dealt with that. I had one guy in particular, I met him 3-4 times. We talked about what he was doing, his project, the literature he'd read, the methodology he was thinking of using, until it dawned on me, I haven't physically seen anything from him. So I asked him, no sign of him. I asked him again, no sign of him. And it sounds like I'm stalking, but as a completely by coincidence, he worked very close to where my wife was working at the time, and I was going to meet her one evening. We knew we were going out one of the evenings, and I knew I was going to be right beside where he was working. So I said, you know what? Listen, I'm going to be in such a place at such time, hotel in Dublin as it happened, right beside where my wife worked. I said, I'm going to meet you for a cup of coffee. Whatever you have, bring it with you. And I've never seen such a dejected human being walking in the door. I got there early. I was sitting, drinking a cup of coffee, and he walked in. He was terrified. He had actually committed nothing to paper because he was scared of it. That's what, for me, these deadlines are. It's to break that anxiety, stress, worry about, is this good enough? I read something recently about imposter syndrome, and it's a genuine, real scenario where you doubt that you're good enough. And a lot of people who, in your situation, for example, who've been working in industry, who have a level of experience, suddenly start doing academic type stuff, and they start thinking, God, I'm really not good enough for this. What I'm doing really isn't up to standard. Forget about that. You wouldn't be on this program at this level if you weren't up to standard. The success rate on the program is really, really good. There are people who have dropped out. They're the ones who haven't got through in the vast majority of cases. We've had very, very few people who haven't got through. And it's not something that was like, I don't want to dwell on the negative, but the very small number of scenarios where people haven't got through, it was no surprise. And one of the big issues, and I should admit focusing on one in my head, but I am, the biggest issue they faced was they met almost none of the deadlines. They spent the whole time saying that they were in control of what they were doing, and they just weren't. So these deadlines, the expectation of the supervisor is that you will meet them. If something happens that you don't meet one of these deadlines, you talk to the supervisor. You send them a message, or you send them some of what you were doing. I personally, as a supervisor, much prefer to see something. I'd much prefer to see 2 pages of reasonably good work than an email saying, sorry, I don't have much done. I'll get it to you next week. Because again, it's that psychological thing of I have submitted something. It's intentional that all these submission dates are on Fridays, because if we made them on Monday, you would destroy your weekend before the submission. So for example, lit review due on the 11th of November. You know, if that was a Monday, you would have spent Saturday and Sunday trying to get it to the standard you wanted it, submit it, and then you're wrecked for the week. This way, you submit on the Friday, you get a couple of days off. If you're not working Friday, Saturday, you get to relax for a day or two and to kind of take a breath. That is important in between sections. You can charge through this whole program as fast as you possibly want. But the best theses that I've dealt with in many, many situations, with 1 or 2 exceptions, are done over the course of this program. I call it program, it's a module technically, but over the course of this thesis program, because it matures as you go along. You do a lit review, then you stop and you think about your methodology, then you start doing research, you start doing analysis, and when you get the analysis, you realize, oh, I need to beef up that literature review. I didn't realize there'd be such an emphasis on that topic. I thought it was going to be more on this topic. I really need to write a bit more on that. And you go back and you revise your lit review. You tweak your methodology. You thought you were going to do one type of research. You started it. It just didn't get where you wanted. So you go back and you revise what you're at. That's very, very natural. Okay, so that's the structure of the program. That's the purpose of the submission points. The submissions go to your supervisor. We'll talk about that in a second. Shruti or whoever's coordinating for us, and I ask people to copy me as well. The reason we do that is it's not very common, but it has happened where emails go astray. And someone says, oh, I sent you that, and it's been gobbled up by a spam filter, or because it's a PDF or whatever document you're sending, someone's email doesn't like it, whatever reason. So it's a way for us to keep track that if a student is going missing, one of the things that Shruti does is to pop people an email saying, is everything okay? We haven't heard of you in a while. And it saves the supervisors then getting stressed and worried. So we have had one instance quite recently of a student appearing to go missing, and it was just at an email. I think they had a wrong email address, or they start after a couple of emails over and back between them and the supervisor, one or other of them used the wrong email address. And as you know, that just keeps perpetuating. Okay, when it comes to what's the story with supervisors? I manage the process as far as the formal proposal for all of the students. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit today about a brainstorming document and also the formal proposal. I take them, I deal with them. The reason we do it that way is there's a lot of repetition. There's a lot of the same thing being said. And because I'm the one talking to you live online, it saves an awful lot of overlap. Once the proposal is put together and you have a decent project, then it makes a lot more sense to have your time slots with a supervisor. The supervisor allocated on various different criteria. Some of it is their own interest, some of it is their expertise, and a lot of it then is their availability. So we have at the moment, I think it's 5, 1, 2, 3, 4. I can think of 5. I'm not forgetting anything. Oh, sorry, 6. Yeah, with 6. Oh, I better not tell you who. I've just forgotten for a second. With 6 academic advisors. I sometimes do academic supervision as well as the kind of the overall coordination. Depends on availability. So I'm not making commitment later in September. I have a couple of things that are nearly finished that I'm working on. So if they get tidy out of the way, I may take on a couple of students myself for this slot. I'm just finishing up with a group. So the job of the supervisor is to guide you and support you and to advise you. It's not to do proofreading. It's not to do copy editing. They're there to bounce ideas off. And every one of our supervisors do things slightly differently. And that's normal across every institution I've ever worked in. Some people, are much more like, I just remember my undergrad, there was one guy that everyone was terrified of. And one of my friends chose him as chose his subject area because he wanted to get, your man always was a tough taskmaster, and he got all these students finished early. So my friend was finished about a month or two before the rest of us. But the pressure, I couldn't cope with that. And the style of supervision was very, dictatorial. And now we don't have anyone like that in the program here. But, it's just, we've different styles, different approaches. What works for some people doesn't work for others. And there's personalities involved as well. So just as a kind of a quality assurance comment, not to suggest that it needs to be implemented. If you have a problem with a supervisor, you can talk to myself in the first instance, or Shruti, or even talk to the supervisor. If we've had one student in the past who got on really well with a supervisor, but just felt their subject was more technical in a particular area than that supervisor was happy with. And the supervisor came to me and said, listen, I don't think I'm supporting here the way I should. And, we agreed to move them over to someone else who was a bit more specialist in that subject area. But the other side of it is most of our supervisors are not digital experts, because in the main, people who come on this program already know their digital technology, they know their subject area. And what the supervisors are doing is supporting the thesis as an academic product more than the actual content of it. If there's difficulties about a particular type of content or particular subject matter, we have professionals in DMI who we can call on to maybe run a webinar. Or so the idea is you get on to me or Shruti, we then get on to the people in DMI who organize this kind of stuff, and they're happy then to see if they can get someone to produce a kind of a 1 hour slot, or there could be a recording there or something of a previous webinar or a information session on a particular aspect of a subject. So do let us know, give us feedback if there's something like that. I'm happy to run main point on that. So come back to me if you think there's something technical that you need as an addition for your thesis. I hope everything is clear so far. I'm inclined to talk on and on and on, so if you do want to interrupt, just send a message in the chat at any point. But I'm also used to the fact that online is quite, a lot of people like just sit and listen. The school where my main job is, we had a very interesting school meeting in the middle of COVID when we're all doing online teaching, and quite a number of staff came on and they were talking about, they'd been kind of keyed up to talk about their experience of teaching online. So there's 3 of them, and all 3 of them raised the challenge of getting students to engage. And the person facilitating it said, so has anyone got any comment on that? With 45 people online, all academics, all teachers, and there was silence. And I couldn't resist. I typed in a comment. I said, isn't it amusing that our biggest problem is that people won't engage, and there's 45 of us and nobody's asking a question? Anyway, that actually got people going. I wound them up a little bit. So that's the process. I'm trying to think, is there anything I've missed out of that? So that the sequencing, the as I said, it's not obligatory. In a previous iteration, pre-Salford, we actually punished slightly. We deducted 1% if you missed a deadline without prior planning or prior notification, and it made people submit, because I think a bit of a carrot and stick approach can be useful, but Salford's ruling is that the only thing that gets marked is the final thesis. Now, to jump a little bit ahead, or way ahead, it's important. One of the other reasons why it's important to engage with your supervisors, they are the person who puts the initial mark on the thesis. When you submit your thesis, the supervisor marks it. It then goes to Salford for moderation. So one of the Salford members of staff looks through all the thesis to look at, standards across the program. Is the marking appropriate? Are they happy with the marks on each of the thesis? When they sign off on that, it then goes to an external examiner who reviews it, and the mark is then processed through the academic channels in Salford. So just to kind support the importance of engaging with the supervisor, if I get a thesis, and I have had it over the years in various places, thesis submitted to me by a student I've never spoken to, it's very difficult to take that thesis seriously and to not be paranoid and suspicious about the origins of the work. And the only time, I'm trying to think, I think it is the only time I've come across plagiarism in a thesis was by a student who he turned up for one supervision session, had a brilliant concept for his thesis, and then months later submitted a thesis which has nothing to do with the initial proposal. So, you can imagine my thoughts when that happened. And then I looked into it, and there was absolutely, and this pre-Turnitin days, there was huge amounts of plagiarism throughout the whole thesis. And he was brought into a panel to explain his situation. We do have software. I keep saying this, and over the last couple of months, I've been promised that the DMI student platform is being rebuilt. So there should be a system in the not too distant future where you can submit directly to the platform and have the software check what's called an originality score. So is your work too much like a published piece of work, or is it original? In the absence of that, Shruti will quite happily manually do that for you. So when we get to the lit review, for example, you can ask her to run your lit review through Turnitin. And based on that, you can get an idea of how good you are at not doing things that might seem to be suspicious or underhand. It's the type of thing, 99% of the time, the people who discover that they've received a high or a low originality score, but a high kind of suspected similarity. Yeah, similarity score, that's the word I was trying to think of. 99% of the time, in my experience, people get a high similarity score is by pure accident or ignorance or lack of skill in knowing how to write. And that's part of the process of learning in doing a thesis as well. So that by the time you get to the final thesis, you know that you're not sending up any warnings to somebody who's looking at your thesis. No. Any questions there, guys, before I talk about the proposal and the brainstorming? Sorry, I'm going to stop sharing that screen. It's hypnotic to be looking at a spreadsheet. Just again on this process or the procedures for here, all of the webinars are recorded. We had one last year, the year before, which the recording completely failed. Like, in other words, I forgot to turn it on. It had been the meeting had been set up differently, so it wasn't auto recording, and I got used to being lazy and not bothering clicking it. So we end up having to do the whole thing again. So it's very annoying when you've tried to recreate in your brain what you said. So they are recorded. You get the link a day or two later. It takes a while for it to be uploaded. If Shruti gets a chance, she does it straight away. If she's busy, they might take it a day or two. So the recordings are uploaded. The link will be sent to you. If there's a forthcoming webinar that you're not able to attend, and you'd like to ask a question, feel free to send me an email directly.
Hi, Kevin.
Yeah.
Paul here. I'll turn my video on so you can see my face. So just because you were talking about the timetable, and it's obviously sort of self-obvious, but as you know, I've been in touch with you, and I'm sort of trying to make some sort of hay while I've got the time. So I'm sort of plowing ahead. How does that work? That's okay, because I know you said you've laid out this timetable, and it may actually turn out that in the end I'm submitting in or around the time at the end. But now while I have the time, I want to see if I get as much work done as possible. Can you guys facilitate that?
We to a certain extent, it puts pressure on a supervisor, because all of the supervisors have other jobs. I'll explain the process, and then I'll tell you what might be a solution.
Wow.
So if I'm supervising a group, I circulate this timetable to all the supervisors, and I know what I do is I put a note in my diary, lit reviews coming in on the 11th of November, methodology coming in on the 16th of December, and I put the time aside to deal with it. And that keeps me in charge. If I don't do that personally, I end up with emails from students going, "Oh, we haven't got any feedback from that lit review yet." And you go, "Oh God, I forgot about it." Because there's so many things going on, and so many email addresses, and so many things flying all directions. So for me personally, that works really well. If a student is outside of that framework, it has to be done on an individual basis with the supervisor. Okay, so I can't tell you that your supervisor will be happy to deal with you on whatever situation, but it's very much a one-on-one relationship with the supervisor. I'll have a chat with you separately about that if you want to clarify that. But to me, it's if you get a supervisor who says no problem, I have a bit of flexibility myself, I'll be able to do that. They're managing workloads as well. So I literally have sent an email today to the supervisor saying, well, I have a new cohort starting this evening. I'll be in touch, but let me know what your availability is like. So they're coming to me saying, and I know one of them in about 2 cohorts ago was under a lot of pressure, but agreed to take somebody because they liked the subject that they were doing, and were comfortable with it. So listen, I'll take them on. Probably shouldn't, but I will. So I'm conscious of that. So I don't want to commit for someone else on whether they'll be able to do that. When it comes to the admin side of things, I don't know, and it's something I'll have to check with Salford. We haven't had somebody who submitted before the deadline before. So, for example, we do have a cohort who are a couple of months ahead, only a couple of months ahead of you guys. So let me see when they'd be. For example, their submission is in March. But I don't know if their system allows you to jump into that cohort for submission. So if you go to the trouble of going ahead and getting it done 2 months early, is there any point? Because it won't be looked at. It's a bit like one of these I don't know if it's one of these loans where if you pay it off early, there's a penalty. That kind of a system.
Yeah.
So I honestly don't know. You're the first one who's asked about that.
It makes sense, but see, I suppose I've time now, and I have a feeling in a few months' time I may have very, very little time.
Okay.
So
what I would suggest from a practical point of view is one of the parts that soaks up your time enormously is reading.
Yeah.
Okay. So I would suggest once we've got even a suggestion in 2 weeks' time on what direction you're talking about going in, go hell for leather at the literature review.
Well, so I've sent you my proposal, and I've already sort of a week into my literature review.
Yep.
I'm trying to get on with it. I'm slightly worried, but I sort of gone down a tangent here I think my proposal is okay, but obviously I'm not the arbiter of that. So that's my only concern at this point in time. So I'm actually doing it, but I just want to make sure I'm not.
I'll have a chat with you the next day or two. We'll arrange a time slot, and we'll get that going. But for anyone, it is a valid one, and that is one of the things that we ask in the proposal is for you to, and I'm jumping ahead now as the proposal rather than the brainstorm. In the proposal, one of the things we suggest is that you provide a timetable. That's not for us necessarily, it's for you. And the reason we suggest that is, and I try to do this when we look at the schedule every new group, Shruti sent me it, which is, what do you think of these dates? And I was looking, thinking, no, because that date is too close to the 1st of January. So session 7, for example, is 4 weeks after session 6. Okay. And if it was 3 weeks after session 6, like all the previous ones were, to be on the 3rd of January, and while some of us might want to be back in work by the 3rd of January and back in thesis mode, the reality is it's around that time of year is very much family time. From previous experience, if we put stuff in the 1st week of January, attendance is going to be really low. And we also moved the findings submission a week maybe later than it would have been normally to accommodate that as well. So what you have to do for that timetable concept is to sit down and say, right, okay, family holidays, that's going to be there, anniversary there, someone's birthday there, national holiday there. So you have to think it out for yourself so that you don't find yourself where there might be 2 or 3 things happening around the time of submission date, around the time where you thought you'd have, without sitting and looking at it, you thought you'd have loads of time, and all of a sudden you think, God, why didn't I think of that in advance? So that's the plan. That's the idea of that, is to get you thinking more practically and realistically for yourself. Right, to focus on the brainstorm, because that is the kind of purpose of the first submission. The idea of brainstorming type exercise is just for you to literally throw ideas at paper. For people who have a very strong idea already, I want you to step away from that a little bit. Okay, so you might have come into this thinking, okay, we've done the modules already. I like them, and that really got me thinking about such and such thing. That'd make a great thesis. Sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. And as I was saying there to Paul about reading, what you need to start doing is to start looking up academic material, because very often your focus is on an industry solution, very much, wouldn't it be good for industry to find out X, Y, or Z? However, that doesn't always translate to a good thesis. For a thesis, you need to be thinking much more picking an achievable kind of target, which is a single focal point. Okay, the whole purpose of the first kind of month of this exercise is for you to focus in on a single sentence. It sounds daft, but if you can come up with one sentence, so by the end of this, when you meet your friends you haven't met for a few weeks, and some places now, COVID is I won't say a distant memory, but it's a lot gentler a control on our lives, and you bump into someone in a coffee shop or in the supermarket or walking down the street, and such one told me you're doing a thesis. What's it on? This isn't someone you want to sit and have a cup of coffee with. This is someone you want to get away from. You give them one set. Oh, I'm doing it on. That is what the proposal is getting to. That one sentence. So how do you get to that? And one of the best approaches, and this is why we've put it in, is to not try and find one topic. Try and think of a couple of topics that are of interest to you. Tease out ideas. So this proposal, I want it to be on a single page. Or sorry, not proposal, the brainstorm, a single page. We did have someone a couple of years ago who cheated wonderfully. Their single page was one of those A0 flip pads that you use in, these, when you're in a meeting being facilitated by a facilitator, and they love you with pens and post-it notes, sticking them up on walls and things like that. And this person had actually written it on a post-it, on an A0 or an A1 flip pad, had handwritten it, photographed it, and sent it to me. I also got one which was 60 bullet points, every one of them a different topic. Right? That's kind of crazy end of the scale. Other people, one idea or maybe 2 ideas, but it's completely up to you what you put on it. This is just a kind of a brain dump. How do you get to the brain dump? Well, this is where, and the reason we don't put too much pressure on, there are places where you're given a week to come up with a proposal. But what I found doing that approach, and I've been involved in it at one stage, it's not always the most mature, well-developed idea. The student comes up with the idea, and very often the academic then helps to shape it into something. We prefer you get a much nicer, much more pleasant experience if it's your creation. Now we guide you and support you, and that's what this is all about. So your first port of call for all of this is Google Scholar. Not Google main search engine, but Google Scholar. You can go into libraries and things if you want, but it's hard enough to navigate them sometimes. But Google Scholar, and again, there are online search engines and library things and EBSCO and all these. I'm not interested in that. What I want you to do is start just popping keywords into Google Scholar, which will produce academic articles, books, and edited, professionally controlled content. Okay, the difference between that and blogs and newspapers and all these things is there's an editorial process. So typically anything that's on Google Scholar has been edited somehow by someone. If it's an academic book, and I know this from experience, so there's a book I've produced. Okay, no, I picked one that I've been more directly involved in. Oh no, I wrote a few bits of this. So they were conflicts, religion, and culture and tourism, right? Myself and my friend Razek were the editors. So the authors wrote the chapters. You don't submit a chapter without checking it properly. It was, I hope, to submit it to us. We reviewed the chapters. We copy edited it. We sent comments back to authors. That was over and back a couple of times. It then went to a professional copy editor in the publishing house. They went through it with a fine-tooth, unbelievably observant, sharp people that they use in this particular publishing house. They come back then with questions. Should that be a capital letter? You use this unbelievable stuff, like you spelled such a word this way here and you spelled it another way here. Really, really good. So that the product that's produced at the end, a good quality academic book, has been checked, and then again it's sent back to the author to double check and all this. So it might have been checked 4 or 5 times. An academic article in a journal can go through even more stages. The author submits it, the editor, desk reviews it is the term it's used. So they look through it and see, is this good enough for my journal? If I think it's good enough, I send it to people to review. Typically people who won't know who the author is. So it's anonymous. So 2, maybe 3 reviewers look at it. It's sent back to the editor, who looks over those reviews and say, are they strong enough for the 2? God, that review is a bit strong. They then send comments to the author, who comes back with the second version that can go to those reviewers again, or maybe different reviewers, and it goes through a couple of iterations, after which point it then could be copy edited and published. Now, what that means, bit of a long-winded explanation, is that the material in those academic publications should be of a high quality. And that's where you're going to learn the language of academic writing, how to present material in a particular style. And if a student comes to me and says, how would I write this? I can tell you how to structure a sentence, but I'd much prefer to direct you to an article and say, there's a good article, have a read. How do they explain it? What voice do they use is the term we'd use. What grammatical sentence structure are they using to get across their idea? What level of personal voice, of personal vocabulary is being used here, or is it very academic? And that is your target. Because what this thesis is all about is the process and the style and the formality of a thesis. I'm going to burst the bubble a little bit here. You may have an absolutely brilliant idea, which could be a phenomenal piece of work. And the person beside you might have a mediocre, very plain, straightforward idea. But they may do a whole lot better than you if they follow the format, the structure, the routine of becoming an academic writer better than you do. So that they produce a literature review which identifies a gap or a topic to be looked at and the background material. Then there's a methodology which explains what you're going to do in your own primary research, followed by findings which are nicely structured. So there's conventions for each of these chapters. And it sounds terrible for me to say this, but to follow the process of doing that correctly is actually more important than what topic you pick, or how interested you are in it, or anything like that. What we're doing here, and it is how it's done, there are marks for doing things correctly more than there are marks for being clever and having a wonderful idea. So what we're trying to do here, and it sounds like I'm cutting the ground from under the idea of a thesis. I'm not, by any shape or form, but it's very much process. What we found is following this format and this structure helps build that process. It doesn't necessarily follow that every thesis is going to work in the exact right sequence. But for example, we don't want you to do any primary research until you've filled out an ethics form, just to protect you and protect DMI and protect Salford and protect the people you're possibly interviewing or surveying or whatever, or their businesses. So there's steps in the sequence. But really what we're all about here is for you to learn how to be an academic and how to write in an academic way. It might be the only time you ever do this in your life. You might think, couldn't be wasting my time doing that again. Or it might be something you decide to bring further. And we're not judging things on that, but the reality is, and I've had students say, but I don't want to write this way. I want this to be more applied. I want this to be more, focused on the issues, not on this stupid lit review. Well, then this is the wrong program. This is a program that gives you a master's qualification in a program which involves a research element, which is academic. So it's a game, it's a process, and a lot of the process is learning what's required and achieving that. So for the brainstorm, open your brain, open it out. I've had various experience with people who have arrived to this point, thought they wanted to do something, and by my job when I look to the brainstorms is to annoy you a little bit. Prod and to poke and say, what do you mean? Why would you pick that? One of the guys in a fairly recent group had a very unusual topic. And one of my only questions was, why would you pick that? And it turns out it was something he'd worked, it was an area he'd worked in, not as in anything to do with digital, but in his pre-digital career, he'd worked in a particular area of activity. And he had a really good working knowledge of it. The minute he said that, I thought, right, okay, we're okay there. I'll give you an example. There was a girl in one of the very early cohorts who was looking at social media and police forces. And her original idea was that she would survey Irish police, we call them the Gardaí, but she would survey members of the Irish police force. I'm thinking, this isn't going to happen. This couldn't happen. How would you get permission to do that? It turns out she was doing digital media work for the police force. Now it backfired, unfortunately, a little bit. She found a solution, but literally the night before she was sending out her survey, someone from head office said, no, we can't do it. Politics had intervened. There had been a story in a national newspaper about why the police force in Ireland were using their personal mobile phones to contact their stations instead of their radios. And basically it was a technical problem, and there wasn't enough people at the other end answering, or I can't remember what the problem was, but they were terrified that her survey would get into public hands. Not even the answers, but the fact that, well, why are the Gardaí, inquiring and doing a survey of the force about social media use? It was so disappointing. She designed a fabulous survey. If she'd done it, it literally would have been the first time in the world that this type of research would have been done. She did a different approach. She ended up looking at, I think it might have been Facebook at that stage. The Facebook uploads of a couple of the different divisions of the police force, what they were putting up, what kind of response they were getting. But then she got to interview the people behind the process. So she produced a beautiful piece. The reason I'm telling you this is because she then went on to basically develop a career on this. She became an advisor for some of the British divisions of the British police. I know in Wales and Scotland, she ran seminars for them on social media usage and how to improve their game. So that was someone who came with what seemed to be a really nice idea, completely impractical, until I realized that was someone she was working in. I had someone else then who was interested. I'm just throwing out ideas here about what I want, the way I want you to think about it. Who was like their proposal was very psychological. They were very much into the psychology of different aspects of social media, and it turned out they had studied psychology in their undergraduate degree, really liked it, but had moved on then to more business and technical stuff. So they understood the vocabulary, they understood the literature, they understood the concepts behind what they were talking about. So one of the things to think about over the next week or two is to do a bit of self-reflection. What is the purpose of this thesis for you? Is it simply to get a promotion? In which case, my advice is pick an easy topic. Pick something you can. If you have very little internal motivation, but your boss is telling you, oh, you really need to do a master's so that we can give you blah blah blah. Then go simple. Do nice, simple, straightforward things. If you're a high achiever and you want to get a really good thesis, well, then you might challenge yourself a bit more. When it comes to subject matter, are you really technical? Are you a nerd who will sit? I'm going to just do this for drama. Are you going to sit in a dark room like this, and with the computer in front of you till all hours of the night, crunching numbers? The reason I say that is there was a guy many cohorts ago, and I really don't know what he did for his thesis. I tried to read it. I couldn't make sense of it. It was about data scraping, but you don't call it that, where he basically told me he could write an algorithm which would send a message to people by taking information off Facebook. It's totally illegal, but this was the basis of what he was looking at, rather than doing it, the analyzing of it. And he could send emails, personalized emails to people mentioning the names of their dog, or the secondary school they went to, or their best friend's mother's name or something. Hi Kevin, you might remember me from school in such and such place, or university in such and such place. This kind of stuff. I didn't clue what he was talking about, but himself and his supervisor were both really into this kind of stuff, and wonderful relationship they had, and they produced a terrific thesis. The opposite of that was a girl who I met to talk about her thesis in the old days when we met face to face for this, before it internationalized. And she looked like she was in a job interview when she was talking to me. I said, and what methods are you thinking of doing to get that kind of information? She said, oh, well, I'm going to use Google Analytics. And there was something about the way she said it. And I said, and are you good at that? I said, well, have you used it before? No, I know what it does, but I'm planning to learn it. I said, okay, now we talked a bit more. And then I realized she was a real people person, much more into the touchy-feely, emotional, kind of encouraging people to give her information, talk to her and all this. And I stopped down. I said, let's go back to this methodology thing. I said, you're looking about learning about Google Analytics. The company you work in, is there someone who does the Google Analytics for you? Oh, yeah. Do you know them? Oh, gosh, yeah. Would they talk to you? Yeah. I said, right, this is what you're going to do. You're going to base your thesis on what those people tell you rather than the actual Google Analytics. So instead of sitting and doing number crunching, she developed a thesis which looked more at the human side of it. Why do people do this? What do they get from it? And one of the kind of concepts she looked at, which I thought was really good, was, do your bosses understand when you give them the data from Google Analytics? Do they understand what they're looking at? And if so, how did they respond to it? Which was much more interesting for her than looking at, have we had this many hits, or where's the traffic coming from, or, the various kind of internal organs of Google. So that's the kind of thing I'd want you to think about. So what kind of qualifications have you? What kind of work experience have you? What hobbies have you? What interests have you? Do you have any access to people or data or information that could help support a thesis, that would give you kind of a unique selling point, as they say in marketing, USP? And as I'm talking, I know there's someone here probably sitting, oh, I never thought of that. I could talk to him. And then he'd introduce me to her, and then I'd have access to that group. oh, this, and all of a sudden your brain starts boom, 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 fireworks go off. That's what this couple of weeks is about. Having that idea and then going, right, I'm going to have to do a bit of research on this. So this is where you do the research on the topic you have. And rather than trying to focus in just concepts, ideas, the broad brush stroke ideas of, I'm thinking of something in this kind of an area because, or this really interests me, but I'd like to emphasize such a thing, or I found a really interesting article about this and I think I could apply it to those sort of ideas. And perhaps maybe either now or at the proposal stage, put in a kind of a short biographical piece. I don't need your entire life history, but what is it that you have done or you've experienced or you understand that helps this particular focal direction that you're thinking of? As I said, if you're interested in, like the girl a couple of years ago had this lovely topic. That was one of the psychological ones. She was looking at social media and how it helps young farmers in their mental health. Because she'd done volunteer work with one of these call centers who help people who have suicidal thoughts, and the loneliness of the farming job, where you go out in the morning, you fix a fence, you come home at lunchtime, you go out in the evening, you check the cattle, you come home in the evening, you go out first last thing at night to make sure the sheep are safe. And farming is a very individual activity, and there had been instances of depression, suicide, and the farming organizations were promoting engagement through social media, and she was really interested in this, but she had a lot of experience of working in a support center as a student and into her kind of early 20s, and hadn't done it for a few years, went into digital marketing and had read a little bit about this and thought, I'm really interested in this, and saw the opportunity to promote and help and to try and understand that sort of a scenario. So I've talked a lot about all sorts of different things. Your focal point for the next short while is going to be that single page of what we call a brainstorm, which is due on the 23rd of September. So that is 2 full weeks away in a few days, 2 weeks and a few days away. And then the following week, so the following Tuesday, which is the 27th, I'll be talking to you again at 8 o'clock for second session. And then pretty soon after that, you're asked to do the formal proposal, which is a week and a bit after that. Once that's done, and I've given you feedback, we then distribute the group of students to the academic supervisors. And they are your main port of call from a supervision point of view after that. So fairly quick turnarounds on both the brainstorming and the actual proposal. Any questions? I'll talk more about the actual proposal once you've got through the first process, which is the brainstorm. Any questions, guys, before we finish up? I do try and keep as tight as I can to the hour, because typically I have 2 slots. I've only one for the couple of weeks with you guys, and then you start twinning with the other group. Yeah, your first 3 slots I have you on your own for a night. And it's also nice to know that an hour is an hour, not an hour and 20 minutes. And even if you're used to lots of meetings, I hate meetings that run beyond what they should. I'm going to try Ahila, if I'm pronouncing your name right. Thank you. And do put in a comment, guys, just to say you're okay with this, just so we know people are around. I'm also conscious of the fact I didn't get, sometimes when I get the list of names, I get a list of where you guys are. So you might just mention where you are later in the brainstorm, just to get an idea of what part of the world you're in. Middle of the morning or late at night, wherever you are. Christians in Dublin. So you had a lovely wet day today, like myself. I was actually in Dublin today. Amsterdam, lovely. Canada. So Solani, you are ahead of, oh yeah, middle of the night for you. Sunny South Africa, lovely. Malta. We've a couple of people, we've had a few people before from Malta. I spent a very nerdy comment now. I spent today editing a paper about climate change in Malta and research to do with tourism. Saudi Arabia. Excellent. So very, very good. Listen, folks, thank you for logging on. As I said, I tried to keep it tight to the time, so we're not wasting people's time. If there's anything that pops up between now and the next webinar that you'd like me to chat about, if you don't want to ask questions in the seminar itself, or the webinar, I never know what to call these things, in the session, do send an email. I'll just give you my email address, which I have to double check. I think it's kevin@digitalmarketinginstitute.com. Where's my email here? Yeah, kevin@digitalmarketinginstitute.com. I'll just put in the chat here just for a quick. That looks right. Just to clarify, while I do my best, I don't always check that every day. I used to give students my personal email address, but I found then it's really hard to keep track. Once I log on to DMI, I know that there's emails there waiting for me. So I try to deal with them on the spot. So if there's a day or two, just the final comment, and I will stop at that. If there's any problem of communication, if, for example, I'm not getting back to you, or a supervisor isn't getting back to you, or Shruti isn't getting back to you, copy one or other of us. Myself and Shruti remind each other of, oh, you forgot to get back to that person. And we look out for emails from each other to warn of that. Similar with supervisors. We'd one a couple of years ago where a supervisor was rushed to hospital with appendicitis, I think. Yeah, quite severe, and they'd been quite a distance from a hospital, so it was pretty dangerous. And a group of students got very grumpy. And we also had someone more recently who had COVID. So, human things get in the way sometimes. We adjust timetables if we need to accommodate that. So if there is a problem, do let us know, and we'll deal with it as much as we can. 9 o'clock on the button. I'm going to stop and wish you a good evening, good night, good morning, and we'll see you in a couple of weeks' time.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks. Good night.
Cheers, folks. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Goodbye.